This episode of Startup Insider is made possible by the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Working Group of the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, Complomar Partners, a leading global supply chain provider for logistics and packaging solutions, Excel Partners, a Rochester-based national leader in seed-stage venture capital investments, and this episode's featured sponsor, the Technical Entrepreneurship and Management Master of Science program at the University of Rochester.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Startup Insider. I'm Alex Zapisochny. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic to many entrepreneurs as well as those who are running existing businesses. How do entrepreneurs work with university tech transfer? Today we have a great panel of individuals in the Rochester Finger Lakes area who work on this, both on behalf of the University of Rochester and the Rochester Institute of Technology. First we have Gail Norris, who is Vice President and General Counsel at the University of Rochester. In addition to her oversight of all legal matters at the university, she is a former corporate general counsel, a former partner at a leading law firm, and has expertise in creating successful tech transfer arrangements. Our next guest is Scott Catlin, who is Associate Vice President of UR Ventures. Scott oversees all tech transfer activities at the university. He previously held a leadership role within the legal division of Abbott. He's worked at a startup and as a management consultant at Bain. He's also a registered patent attorney and served as a Judge Advocate General in the U.S. Air Force, a very busy individual. Scott, how are you? And our final guest is Bill Jones, who is Director of Venture Creations, which is a part of the Rochester Institute of Technology. It is its business incubator, also home of a NYSERDA-sponsored clean energy incubator. And Bill oversees the development of that incubator, which consists of companies with ties to RIT. And previous experience of Bill's include the roles in economic development, as well as being a successful entrepreneur. Welcome everybody to today's program. And perhaps we start with a really basic overview of what is tech transfer. And Gail, can you start us off on that?
Sure. So at research universities across the United States, people are busy working in laboratories on research funding often provided by the federal government to solve basic science problems that end up creating some intellectual property, some novel new ideas that are sitting there in the research labs at research universities. So the perfect solution would be to work with industry or startup companies outside the university to take the beginnings of those ideas that were created in research labs and transfer them to companies so that they can commercialize them for public benefit.
Okay, and maybe starting off talking specifically about the U of R first, how would either an entrepreneur who wants to start a new company or somebody who's working at an existing small or medium-sized company work with the University of Rochester, for instance, to make something like that happen?
Well, the first thing would be identifying a technology they're interested in, and there's a couple of different ways that can happen. Primarily, I mean, we have a website. They can certainly call me up or my office, and typically our experience is people typically have an area of interest they want to talk about, whether it's optics or a medical technology or what have you. It may also be that they've met with the researcher or they've heard about some research going on at the university that intrigues them, that they think they could build a business around or that they could move a product forward. And so the first thing is obviously getting in contact and having a discussion to really understand, and it's a two-way street. The entrepreneur or the company comes in with a set of ideas about what they'd like to do, and we want to make sure that it matches up with the technology and that there's an opportunity there to really move a product or service forward. So that would be the first step.
Okay, and actually maybe what would be some of the first steps at RIT?
Well, they fall into different categories. Not everybody in the incubator is commercializing university patents, but there will be faculty members that have a product or an idea that may be patent, may be in the patenting process that they want to commercialize. So we'll sit down and advise them on that. We have other companies at the incubator that actually are interested in licensing, so we'll connect them up with our tech transfer office. So it's a circular thing, but we're the end of the continuum of commercialization.
Well, one of the things that I really fascinates me about technology transfer, and this goes back to the experience I had actually licensing something out of the University of Rochester as part of iCardiac, is I think there are many entrepreneurs who just don't realize when they're trying to start a company that there are patents out there which are the product of perhaps millions of dollars of federal research and tons of hours of some of the smartest people in the country, and that they can basically just show up, say, hi, I'm here, and find a way to start a company around it. And maybe tell us a little bit about what are the basics of what does an arrangement potentially look like with somebody who's coming in, who's already identified a patent, and who says, I think maybe I can make something of it.
Okay, well, a little bit of it depends on the technology. At the University of Rochester and RIT, I'm sure, we research everything from semiconductor chip architecture to monoclonal antibodies. And as you can imagine, the path to commercialization of technology in those two areas as examples are quite different. So a startup company that wants to license, let's say, a piece of software, the steps would be maybe a little bit more simplified because the path to commercialization doesn't require the same amount of dollars. So it would be a license for the technology that we developed at the university that would require the company to go through what we call due diligence, to take the product and diligently try to get it launched for commercial use, because the last thing the university wants to do is give somebody a technology and they decide, gee, I'm not ready yet, or maybe it's competitive to one of my other ideas and shelve it. So we have this due diligence requirement that they work on the technology to bring it to commercial use. Typically our licensing terms require almost no money until there's revenue generated. We're very aware that with entrepreneurs who are starting up companies, cash is king. And we don't want to divert upfront money from licenses that could be invested in the technology to bring it forward to successful. So we are aware of that.
And actually, that's a really important point, because entrepreneurs who may not have much money actually still may have a research, basically beginnings of their company. What about, Scott, with companies that are a little bit more further advanced that already do have an existing company and maybe want to add to that by licensing a patent?
Well, and maybe just to first build on something Gail said, in addition to the licenses, we can actually do short-term options. If an entrepreneur comes in, has an interest, but isn't really sure if it fits or where it's going to go, 3 months, 6 months, something in that area for very, very low cost, that says, okay, look, you can get access to it, you can get access to the researchers and their labs and that kind of thing, to really sort of kick the tires and decide whether you really want to move forward, and then do the license, as Gail talked about. Not that we have to do the option, but it's a nice opportunity for somebody that doesn't have a lot of money but is interested and wants to make sure that it makes sense. So that's something that we're doing more and more of, and I think that's really valuable. Yeah. So that's.
I think that's a really good point, because one of the things that sometimes surprises entrepreneurs is inside the university we're working on a basic research idea. We're not thinking about a product. That's just the nature of the way universities are. So a lot of our technology is a pretty giant step away from commercialization, and sometimes an entrepreneur needs to digest what those steps are, because we haven't really thought about that yet. We've advanced the science, but not necessarily the commercial application of it.
And Bill, what is it like at RIT? What are perhaps some typical terms or ways that entrepreneurs work with RIT?
Well, I think we have the same flexibility because, again, when you're looking at an early stage entrepreneur, not a company coming in that's even a company of your, iCardiac, we sit down with them to make sure they understand what they're getting into. Because again, you've got everybody from somebody that had an idea yesterday and who has no experience whatsoever in entrepreneurship, no money, up through people that have done it before. So we'll sit down and talk to them, kind of, again, a handoff. If you do this, this is what you're going to have to go through. And it's a long process. One of our 3 mission bullets at Venture Creations is to commercialize university innovations and intellectual property. And I say it's hard. A lot of people get, there's kind of a glamour to it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years, not counting the medical stuff. And you got to work full time. And some of these people come in just haven't given it any thought. It's not, it's, you know, and so we're there to educate them as to what they will most likely experience and what they're going to have to give up, you know, in terms of time and home life. A lot of people think there's easy money out there. At this stage, it's going to be mostly self-funded, and we just put them through that. And it's interesting that over half don't come back. You know, they understand it, and they're just not cut out to be entrepreneurs. And then you focus on the ones that basically call you back the next week.
Well, this was a great start to understanding the basics, and we'll be right back with more Startup Insider right after this.
This episode's featured sponsor is the Technical Entrepreneurship and Management Program at the University of Rochester. The Team Masters program is for business-savvy engineers who want to go beyond invention. The program can be completed in as little as 1 academic year. Part-time study and merit-based scholarships are available.
Welcome back to Startup Insider. We're talking about university technology transfer. We focused a little bit more before the break on how entrepreneurs can set up brand new startups. Let's delve a little bit more into the situation of where you have an existing company. What are some typical terms that those companies may expect if they happen to find a patent at the University of Rochester that they like?
Well, it is a little bit different because, you know, as we talked about in the first segment with entrepreneurs, it's really more about, you know, should I get in, how do I get started, that kind of stuff, as opposed to with an existing company, whether it's small, medium, or the larger companies. Typically, they'll identify something they're interested in and contact us, and it can come in a couple of different ways. They may come straight to us. It may be through sponsored research, because many companies actually sponsor research at the university. But in any event, then we basically sit down with them. It's really just a license, although not that they couldn't do the option that we talked about, but most of the time they've already identified what they want to do. And then, you know, the typical terms in those cases would be, as Gail mentioned earlier, there's going to be diligence requirements, because even if you're a very big company, we still, you know, we're not interested in having them shelve our technology. We want to make sure it moves forward. So we want to have intelligent milestones that they have to hit along the way that we agree on. But then there's usually a royalty that gets paid back to the university for use of the technology. And you know, and they're fairly standard basic terms. I think we're pretty flexible. We want to try to find ways to get it done. We know that we can't move technologies forward on our own. And so my experience is most of the time we can get a deal done if we can find the right partner.
Okay. And actually at RIT, whether it's through venture creations or otherwise, what are some ways that more advanced companies can work with you? Well,
there's some corporate research where they will actually come in and engage RIT to do specific projects, get a faculty member and a grad student to engage, and in that case they control the IP much more. In terms of large companies coming in to get involved with patents, that's outside the area that I work, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit actually about maybe the specialties of each of the universities, and maybe start off with the University of Rochester. If you are a company or an entrepreneur interested in a particular industry, what are the ones where they absolutely must talk to the U of R?
Well, obviously, what you're looking at in a license from the university's perspective is what the path is to getting it from where it is in a laboratory, a research laboratory at a university, to commercial use in a store or with a company that can use it. And that varies depending on the type of technology. So again, we talked before the break about software. So a software program that can be commercialized is much easier to commercialize. The path to it is shorter, and the capital needs in particular are much more modest. A medical technology, which is what the University of Rochester is full of, may involve clinical trials, drug development, FDA regulatory hurdles to jump for approval. The path to approval of a medical technology, whether it's a device or a compound, is typically 7 to 10 years and millions of dollars. So we will take that into account in licenses, and we need to make sure the entrepreneurs understand that path and have the financial wherewithal, at least milestone by milestone, to achieve the technology expertise and the cash they need to get there.
And Scott?
But in terms of the type of technologies that we think we have significant strength in, that people and the ones that we get the most interest for in most cases, optics is a big one, and much like I would assume imaging technology at RIT is certainly what we're well known for in the region, but at U of R and RIT as well. But then and that's one. Material science we have a fair amount of strength in. On the medical side, orthopedics, we're actually the #1 funded NIH program in the country for orthopedics, so that's really top notch. Cardio, especially cardiac rhythm, which you're aware of in your business, Alex, is another strength. Neuromuscular, we do a lot of work with muscular dystrophy and things in the Parkinson's, Alzheimer's area. Vaccines, we've done very well with the HPV vaccine and the Hib vaccines in the past. So there's a fair range. It's, as Gail has noted, all of those have their own special challenges. It makes it both interesting and difficult to sort of cover that range of technologies, but it's really top-notch, incredible research that, as Gail already mentioned, we are somewhat desperate to try to move into the commercial space because we really feel like there's a lot there that could really impact patients' lives and really change the world for the better. So figuring out a way to get that done is the challenge.
So Bill, some of the particular strengths of RIT's technology.
Well, obviously, oversimplified, I say hardware and software, and particularly technologies in the imaging science. RIT is one of the largest schools in computer science. But kind of going back to the computer software opportunities vary from anything from, a simple phone app that, 2 students might write in their dorm to a platform such as what is used by Vinomics in their sensor system that was developed over 10 years. So even within the software, we have everything from something that's very quick that you could sell online, I wouldn't even call it a business, to things that take a long time. One of the things we're getting in more and more, and it leverages the NYSERDA-sponsored Clean Energy Incubator, is the whole field of sustainability, clean tech being kind of a part of that, and the new Golisano Institute of Sustainability. And the challenges with many things there are the capital requirements. People talk about clean energy, but they don't understand what's behind it. What's it cost to build a nuclear power plant? There's billions. So we've got a new company that reduces the energy and waste treatment. Their little pilot setup cost $250,000. So it's not something you can get into and just say, I'll put it on my charge card. So that's our equivalent to medical clinical trials. It's big capital for big equipment.
One of the things we like to say around the University of Rochester is once you've seen one technology license deal, you've seen one technology license deal. I mean, they really are each very unique, and what's required to bring them to success is very unique, and it's very hard to put them into one box and one path forward because it varies so much.
Yeah, and I would say there's some, we're talking a lot about funding and some of the challenges, but some of the things that that we've seen that make projects more or less successful, whether it's an entrepreneur or even sometimes the larger companies, is identifying the technology is one thing. Bringing the right team to the table, from the outside is another important piece of it. But also being able to work with the researcher, because most often it's not just a literal handoff. Here's the patent, good luck. In the best cases, and I think actually our cardiac is one of them. Maybe you could speak to this, Alex. I'll turn the tables around. But having a good researcher that's continuing the research and being able to assist in the development of the technology going forward, I think is often very, very valuable. But that means that when you think about a team, being able to work with that researcher and have that kind of rapport and be able, because not all researchers are created equal, and some are easier to work with than others, just like entrepreneurs. So I think thinking, which is sometimes not a lot of thought goes into that. You just sort of assume everybody will get along, but if everybody doesn't get along, it can be disruptive. So.
That's actually a really important topic, and we will pick that up right after this break when we will talk about iCardiac as well as other lessons learned from the tech transfer world. We'll be right back.
This program is sponsored by Complomar Partners, a market-leading provider of fulfillment and packaging services, assembly, distribution, e-commerce, direct mail, print, and reverse logistics solutions. Complomar enables its customers to reduce cost, lower inventory, and improve performance. Excel Partners, a venture capital fund that invests in seed-stage, high-tech, high-growth startups in upstate New York. Excel Partners was formed in partnership with the University of Rochester and the state of New York, and focuses in the areas of life sciences, materials, energy, IT, and software. And the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Working Group of the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, Building the Finger Lakes Entrepreneurial Economy.
Welcome back to Startup Insider. Right before the break, Scott tried to turn the tables to have me talk a little bit about iCardiac, and you bring up a really important point. Having a proper management team that comes to you that's really ready to take a technology and go through the years and other steps necessary to get that company to a good point, that's really a key. And maybe, Bill, you could talk a little bit about what is it that Venture Creations, or RIT generally, looks for to really screen that management team and make sure that it's ready?
Well, there's two aspects, one that we can screen, one that we can only observe. And the first is, do they have any type of management team in terms of diversity of talents? If you're bringing in two people that are both PhDs, both researchers, kind of the same type of personality, you haven't got a good foundation. You want somebody that may have, knowledge of the industry, knowledge of the manufacturing, how it's going to be set up, somebody in finance, and typically the technology person will most likely not make a good CEO. So one of our success stories,
actually, can you expand on that? Because I bet a lot of people who are listening to this may wonder, why do you say that?
Well, they're good technology people, and it's always nice to be the CEO, but at the same time, there's certain skill sets, and we've had a case where you can be either, but one of the problems is they want to be both. The technology person still doesn't want to give up the technology, but very quickly they become two full-time jobs, and you got to give up one. So that's one of our approaches. You can be either. We won't make you not be the CEO, but you got to give it up.
Well, we've heard that feedback a lot from our startup companies, that there is a little bit of a tension between the technologist and a successful company, because the technologist wants to get the product perfect.
Yeah.
And a true businessman wants to get to the first dollar of revenue. And there can be some inherent tension in that.
One of our more successful internal patent developments was I met with him and said, what do you need? And he says, 1,000 square feet of tile space and a president. So we went out through our network of myself and my staff, got candidates, saved him the effort of identifying people outside his network, and then he interviewed and selected one of those three. So we were able to bring talent to the table. Early startups sometimes won't need necessarily a CFO, but we can bring in somebody who can advise them and gradually build that expertise. And then the second part that I mentioned was, in hindsight now, we've determined that the real skill they need is to be able to build that team. So they come in with a very limited group, but over the next 2 or 3 years, you may have to build a team with all the functions that may be 6, 8, 10 people. And do you have those skills to go out and identify them and recruit them and bring them on and manage them? And that's been the most common element of the companies that have failed.
So Scott, what I noticed, which was quite interesting, is that recently the U of R renamed the Tech Transfer Office into UR Ventures, and I'm thinking that some of the reasons may relate to what Bill was saying, but what is the thinking and what are those changes at now UR Ventures?
Yeah, no, thank you. It is related, and one thing I'll build on what Bill just said in terms of putting together a team, because we've got more than half of our technologies in the medical space. One of the team pieces that's particularly critical for our technologies is often the clinical, regulatory, and even reimbursement thinking early stage to even know whether the product is something that you can get through the FDA or get approved and make sales on and what the return will be, which actually leads into sort of some of the ways we're rethinking the way we do tech transfer at the U of R. Moving away from what I would say was a bit more passive in the past, where if somebody wanted a license, we would give them a license and basically, allow them to run off and do their best with the technology, which is okay, and that still happens to some extent. But most of the time, many of our technologies, as Gail said earlier, are very early stage, mostly still being handled by the researchers themselves, often who have limited business experience. And so it's really unfair to just sort of kick them off into the deep water and let them, try to do their best to pull together the resources to advance the technology. And that's whether it's in a startup or even inside the university, because most of the time when you get to the end of a federal grant, you've done a lot of research. There's a lot of value there, but it's still very much research. It's not applied. And so, proving the concept, making a prototype, doing early stage testing is particularly critical, especially, and even from an entrepreneur or a business perspective, you'd like to be able to see that before you put your money and effort into taking it forward. So that's where you start getting to some of the gaps that people talk about. And if we don't do that, it's hard for an entrepreneur to really pick it up and start from research zero and build the whole company. So at UR Ventures, and it's part of the reason why we changed the name to indicate that we're taking a different approach, much more hands-on, proactive inside the university, as well as reaching out and working with entrepreneurs and the resources in the area or resources that aren't in the area. I mentioned the regulatory clinical. We don't always have all those resources here, but they're critical to those technologies. So we reach out to our network, alumni and otherwise, and bring those resources together to really make sure that we can be successful at doing that. So what we're changing in summary is really being much more active and hands-on. I talk about project management approach. There's a lot of things that need to go into developing a technology and even starting a company, and our ability to help pull those resources together to maximize the success is really what we're talking about doing.
So Gail, I know that one of the things that you've been focused on is the importance of the relationship between the entrepreneur and the researcher, to what Scott was just talking about. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also maybe successful examples of where that worked particularly well?
Right. So tech transfer, as we've been discussing, is all about a handoff from the university who's got a different focus to the company. And the worst example of the way tech transfer works is you throw it over the fence and then the company catches it on the other side. The best way is to be involved at the research and in that handoff, as we discussed before. And actually, I think statistics will say that 60% or more of the technologies that have successfully come out of universities have done so because there was a relationship between the researcher and the business to begin with. So ideally, it will be a handoff that's more of a partnership or a collaboration from the time that transfer starts well into the commercialization process, and that there's really literally a collaboration to get the idea off the ground and into commercial use.
And how much time typically would a researcher be able to spend from the University of Rochester actually working at a startup?
Well, if the company's willing to spend some money sponsoring research at the university, there's really not too much of a limit. If the researcher is going to consult for the company, we actually do allow personal consulting time by the researcher, but it's limited to an average of 1 day a week.
And what if somebody wants to perhaps work with somebody that's a graduate student that's doing something interesting? Are there rules or limitations at either university?
The graduate student is, certainly allowed to do what they want on their own time. There is some tax laws for private universities like RIT and U of R that would limit the ability of a graduate student or a researcher, faculty researcher at the U of R to use university not-for-profit resources to help private companies without there being an arm's length contract that gives fair value for that.
Okay. This has really been a great conversation. One thing I will add from the cardiac perspective, because I think Gail makes a hugely important point about the importance of getting to know the researchers. At iCardiac, where I came from, we actually had multiple meetings over the course of several months with the researchers, and ostensibly it was to try to understand the research, but at the same time, and perhaps even more so, it was about, can we really work together cooperatively? Are they going to, to Bill's point, are they going to insist on being the CEO, for instance? Are they going to kind of understand where the research is relative to where it needs to be at the end of the commercialization? But the key, and we're wrapping up here, and thank you very much, Bill, Scott, and Gail for being here today. But the key, I think, for the Finger Lakes community is to know that we have these two great universities represented today and a number of others in our community, and they do have many patents and many researchers that have the amazing tools or the amazing springboard for people to go and create companies out of. And I think that hopefully people reach out to the U of R and RIT and our other regional universities. And good luck, entrepreneurs. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Startup Insider.